Joining us now is Pentagon Press Secretary and retired Rear Admiral John Kirby. Admiral Kirby, we appreciate you making time to be with us this evening. The Kremlin today is pushing back on a claim from U.S. intelligence that President Putin's aides aren't being honest with him about what's happening on the ground in Ukraine. Tell me about the concern you've got, if that's true. If Vladimir Putin is not receiving honest battlefield intelligence from his advisors, what does that mean?
Well, one thing it could mean is that once he does become fully informed, he might overreact. I mean, he's already escalated this conflict. You don't have to look any further than the dreadful images that are coming out of places like Mariupol and Kyiv to see how hard he continues to strike Ukrainian citizens and the Ukrainian cities. So he could maybe overreact if he's not being fully informed. We don't know what he's going to do when he finds out the full scope of his military's failures inside Ukraine. The second thing that's disconcerting for us is what does this mean for the negotiating table? If he's not fully informed about how poorly they are doing on the ground, then it could definitely affect the negotiating tactics at the table and the degree to which he's able, even if he's willing, the degree to which he's able to negotiate in good faith with the Zelensky government.
Okay, so that's one valid concern. Is he going to a negotiating table, or are his people going there with correct information? But you've also been particular in describing Russia's movements in and around Kyiv as repositioning as opposed to a de-escalation, which is what the Russian negotiators suggested the other day in Istanbul. What's the latest intelligence that you can tell us about troops and what they're doing around Kyiv? Is there any indication that they're repositioning versus pulling back and refocusing on eastern Ukraine?
What we have seen is a small number, less than about 20% of what we assess is their assembled force around Kyiv, moving away from the city, more towards the north. It's not exactly clear where they're going to go, how long they're going to be there, or what the ultimate purpose is. But what we don't believe is that he's planning to send them home, because the majority of the troops that he still has around Kyiv are still there in Kyiv. Now, they're in defensive positions. They're not moving on the city, but the city still is coming under airstrikes and missile strikes every single day. So what we think he's going to do is refit these troops, resupply them, and put them back into Ukraine for offensive operations somewhere else. Now, again, we don't know exactly where. We don't know exactly when. All we can do is go by our other assessment that the Russians are trying to prioritize that Donbas region, the eastern part of the country. So it's possible that some of these troops will just simply be moved from Kyiv over to the Donbas to try to reinforce their offensive operations there.
There's also new reporting. You know, a month ago, we had word about a fire at a nuclear plant in Zaporizhia. Now, this is a massive concern all around Europe, not the least Ukraine. There's reporting today that Russia's pulling back from Chernobyl because of radiation exposure. You seem to suggest at today's briefing that it's not necessarily radiation exposure that might be causing them to pull back. What more can you tell us about that?
Well, what we think is that we do assess that some of their troops are leaving Chernobyl. The general assessment is that this is all part of, again, this repositioning effort. We have no indication that that there's a radiation problem or a health hazard at this time. Look, we're going to continue to watch this and monitor it as best we can. But our best estimate, our best assessment at this point is that this is part of his repositioning effort, the ability to take troops out of some area and then move them into another area.
Today, the head of Britain's GCHQ, which is the British equivalent of America's NSA, said that some Russian troops are refusing orders. Some might be sabotaging their own equipment. And there was one report of shooting down their own aircraft. I guess my question to you is, do you understand whether that dynamic is going on amongst Russian forces? And does the Pentagon believe this is happening wide scale, or is this something that is largely very specific and isolated?
Yeah, I can't confirm every item in that British reporting there about shooting down aircraft and everything that they put in there. That said, Ali, what we have seen is poor unit cohesion, poor morale, poor leadership. We've got plenty of anecdotal evidence that at times and at places Russian soldiers have simply given up. They've simply walked away from the fight. That they have, in some cases, actually sabotage their own vehicles so that they would run out of fuel and not be able to replace that fuel. We know that they have had morale and unit cohesion problems born, we think, largely out of the fact that it's a conscript force. They're draftees. These are young men who, in many cases, had no idea that they were going to be invading another country. They thought they were going on a training exercise, and they clearly weren't fully prepared and ready for actual combat. So we know they're having problems like that. They're also having leadership issues, command and control, not only the ability of their generals to talk to one another, but the willingness to talk to one another and to coordinate their operations between, say, air and ground. There's very little bit of that joint effectiveness that you would expect from a modern military these days.
Admiral, I just want to explore this a little more with you because of your long military expertise. Tell me about that distinction in morale where we're seeing these Ukrainian troops who, going into this thing, did not look like they were well equipped to take on one of the largest armies in the world. But the morale of those troops seems to be very different from the morale of the Russian troops. Tell me how that actually plays out when you're commanding troops.
Yeah, morale is not to be underestimated in a military unit. It can be a terrific force multiplier, and by that I mean it can actually add exponentially to a unit's effectiveness on the field of battle or at sea on warships. The way a unit feels about itself, about its effectiveness, its competency, about the teammates, about themselves, all of that can have a huge impact on effectiveness and efficiency in battle and in combat. We're not seeing that on the Russian side, and we have plenty of anecdotal evidence, as I said, that they're not fighting well, that they're not fully informed. They're even having trouble still feeding their troops and fueling their vehicles. I mean, there's a lot of problems that the Russians have caused on themselves. On the Ukrainian side, however, morale is very high. Now, they are too. They're taking losses. They're suffering. They're watching their friends and their families have to leave. They're seeing their cities destroyed, and yet this has really fired them up. They've got an esprit de corps. They're getting the weapons and the systems that they need to fight back effectively, and they're using those weapons. And they've been very agile, very nimble on the battlefield, choosing when and where and how they're going to defend and how they're going to strike in very, very devastating ways for the Russian military.
Let's talk about those weapons that they're getting. The U.S. has already supplied Ukraine with a lot of lethal weaponry, more arriving every day. But if this war grinds on for months, is the Pentagon willing to and in a position to continue supplying Ukraine with weapons to fight Russia at the current pace that we are doing?
President Biden has been very clear that we're going to continue to support Ukraine's ability to defend itself as long as we can and as fast as we can. And you're right. There is material arriving even as you and I are speaking, and that's coming on the last package that the president approved, the $800 million security package that he approved just a little bit more than a week ago. There's already been a half a dozen or so shipments of that material getting into the region. We're going to work to get it into the hands of the Ukrainians as fast as we can. And I would add that while we're focused rightly on the security assistance, the material, we also need to remember the training. For the last 8 years, the United States, Great Britain, Canada, other allies have been devoting a lot of training into Ukrainian armed forces to help them use this material. So it's not just about the stuff, it's about the way they use the stuff and how they know how to use these weapon systems. And that came at a great effort by so many allies to help train them over the last 8 years.
The U.S. intelligence on this has been fairly accurate since even before this invasion started. There was one thing, though, that was an estimate that it would not be long. If Russia threw everything it had and all of those troops that it had lined up, this would end sooner than it has. We're now in the 6th week of this war, and one of the enduring mysteries is the airspace above Ukraine. For outside observers, they've been curious as to why the Russian Air Force has not been able to achieve air superiority. What's your take on this?
One of the reasons is because of how nimble the Ukrainians have been with their air defense systems. They have both short and long range air defense systems. They're using them very effectively and quite efficiently. They're being very careful about how they're defending their skies, and they have been able to make it very difficult for Russian pilots to fly inside Ukrainian airspace. In fact, most airstrikes that you're seeing, the damage that you're seeing, most of those airstrikes are actually emanating and never coming, and the aircraft are never leaving Russian airspace or Belarusian airspace. They're not venturing into Ukrainian airspace, and if they do, they're not staying very, very long. And of course, a lot of the airstrikes are missile strikes that are being launched from airfields and from sites inside Russia or Belarus. The Ukrainians have been very, very effective in how they're trying to defend their skies. We assess that the skies are contested. Here's the other thing, though. We're also working with other allies and partners who have long-range air defense systems that we know the Ukrainians know how to use, like the S-300, and we're trying to work with them to see if they can provide some of those systems to help replenish the stocks of the Ukrainians.
Admiral, to the extent that Russia has said and might be refocusing some of its efforts on eastern Ukraine, which is where this all started, what are your concerns about that?
Well, this is an area it's been a hot war for 8 years, Ali. I mean, this is a piece of ground that Russia has long coveted and long wanted. We think they certainly overextended themselves in the early weeks of this conflict, attacking on multiple lines of axes, north, south, east, trying to take the capital city, and they've realized that they're not going to do that. So now it looks like they're going to redouble their efforts in the Donbass region, which they've been fighting over now for 8 years. It's unclear whether this is a negotiating tactic. Mr. Putin just wants to get some more leverage at the table because he's got more ground in the eastern part of the country, or whether that is, in fact, now a more limited goal he's trying to achieve. Just get the Donbass region, get that land bridge to Crimea, and call it a day. We're just not sure where they intend to go on this. But one thing we know for sure, there are lots of Ukrainian forces in that part of the country, and they are still there, and they're still fighting very, very hard. The Russians have not been able to take that Donbass region. Now, we'll see if they're going to redouble their efforts, if they're going to add reinforcements. We think that that's what's in their minds. But believe me, the Ukrainians they've made it very clear, not just in word, but in deed, that they're going to continue to fight for that part of their country.
Retired Rear Admiral John Kirby from the Pentagon, we appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us, sir.
Yes, sir. Good to be with you.